One morning, Sicil's phone buzzed in her pocket while she sat in the middle of a lecture, half listening to the professor's droning voice. She pulled it out, noticing Tia's name flashing on the screen. Confused, she quickly stepped outside to answer. Before she could even say hello, Tia's frantic voice burst through the line. "Sicil, rush to the hospital now!" Tia's breathless urgency sent an immediate chill down her spine. "I'm sending you the GPS location." "Tia, what's going on?" Sicil's voice trembled, but before she could get an answer, the line went dead. Her hands shook as she pocketed her phone, barely able to think straight. Panic surged in her chest, and without a second thought, she grabbed her things and dashed out of the building, her mind racing with questions and fear. Ethan! Something's happened to Ethan! Her stomach turned as she fumbled to open the GPS location Tia had sent. The journey to the hospital felt endless, every passing second adding weight to her already mounting dread. The moment she arrived, Sicil sprinted through the automatic doors and spotted Tia pacing near the waiting area. She rushed to her side, her heart hammering in her chest. "Tia, what happened? Where's Ethan?" Sicil's voice was barely above a whisper, fear constricting her throat. Tia, eyes swollen from crying, swallowed hard and met Sicil's terrified gaze. "A car. It turned without signaling and knocked Ethan off his bike. He's in surgery now. The doctors are trying their best. I came as soon as I heard." Sicil's knees buckled as her world spun for a moment. Her hand flew to her mouth in disbelief. No, this can't be happening." Her voice cracked, her heart sinking deeper with each word. Without another word, she grabbed Tia's hand and together they hurried down the long, sterile hallway toward the operating theatre. As they neared the waiting area, they found Ethan's parents. Mr. Turner was pacing anxiously, his hands running through his hair in nervous frustration. Mrs. Turner sat on a bench nearby, clutching a small silver cross between her fingers, her eyes tightly shut as she whispered desperate prayers. Sicil felt the weight of the scene hit her like a wave. She had never seen Ethan's father look so helpless. She and Tia approached quietly, and Mrs. Turner immediately opened her eyes, noticing their presence. Sicil sat down next to Mrs. Turner and gently took her hand, offering what little comfort she could. Tia sat on the other side, holding her other hand. "He'll be okay," Sicil whispered, more to herself than anyone else, but Mrs. Turner squeezed her hand as if to cling to that hope. "Has there been any news?" Sicil asked quietly, her voice wavering. Mrs. Turner shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. "Not yet," she whispered. "He was taken to the surgery almost an hour ago. They said it was serious, but no news yet." Her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together, fighting to stay composed. Tia, sitting on the other side, squeezed Mrs. Turner's hand got tighter. "He's strong, Mum. Ethan's strong. He'll pull through this." Mr. Turner, still pacing, suddenly stopped and turned to face the group, his voice thick with barely contained emotion. "Why didn't I stop him from riding that damn bike today? I should have." His words trailed off as his voice cracked, his frustration and helplessness apparent. "You couldn't have known, Dad," Tia interjected, her voice soft but firm. "Accidents happen. No one could have predicted this." Sicil's chest tightened at the sight of them all in pain, but her mind kept replaying the last conversation she had with Ethan. His laughter, the way he always reassured her, the thought of never hearing him again. She couldn't bear it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, trying to stay strong for his family. Tia wrapped her hand around Sicil's, pulling into a tight squeeze. "He will need his turkey sandwich as soon as he wakes up." And they both stifled a strained smile. As they sat together, waiting for any news, every second stretched into an eternity. The sterile smell of the hospital mixed with the soft murmur of other families waiting for their loved ones. The silence between them was only broken by the occasional sniffle or sigh. Sicil's hand never left Mrs. Turner's. Hours later, a doctor finally emerged from the operating room. His expression was serious but not grim, which immediately gave them a sliver of hope. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner?" the doctor called. Both of Ethan's parents stood quickly, their faces etched with worry. Sicil and Tia stood alongside them, their hearts pounding. The doctor took a deep breath before speaking. "The surgery went well. Ethan's injuries were severe, but we were able to stabilize him. He's still unconscious, and the next 24 hours are critical, but he's a fighter." Mrs. Turner collapsed into tears, clutching the cross to her chest. Mr. Turner hugged her tightly, relief flooding through him. Sicil exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding, and Tia hugged her, tears streaming down both of their faces. "Can we see him?" Sicil asked, her voice small but hopeful. The doctor nodded. "One at a time for now, just to make sure he's stable, but yes, you can see him." Sicil's heart fluttered at the thought of seeing him. She would wait her turn, but she couldn't help feeling a surge of hope. Ethan was going to be okay. Ethan's hospital room was quiet, the beeping of machines and the soft hum of hospital air conditioning the only background noise. Sicil sat beside his bed, her fingers gently tracing patterns on his hand, waiting for any sign of life. It had been 2 agonizing days since the accident. The doctors had kept him in an induced coma to let his brain recover, and now all she could do was wait. Suddenly, Ethan's fingers twitched. Cecil's heart skipped a beat. His eyelids fluttered, and after what felt like an eternity, they slowly opened. His eyes, though unfocused at first, eventually found her. Relief washed over her like a tidal wave, and tears filled her eyes. "You're awake!" Sicil whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Oh, thank God!" Ethan blinked, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he managed a faint, weak smile. He didn't speak, couldn't yet, but that tiny smile was all Sicil needed. She squeezed his hand gently. "You pulled quite a stunt, you know," she said, her voice wavering between relief and a feeble attempt at humor. "Never do that again, okay?" Ethan's lips curved up ever so slightly, but he didn't have the strength to respond. His eyes drooped again, fighting the weight of fatigue, but Sicil could tell he understood. She pressed the call button to alert the nurse, her other hand still holding onto Ethan's. Then quickly she dialed Tia. "Tia, Ethan just woke up," she said, barely containing her excitement. "What? He's awake? Oh my God, I'm on my way." Tia's voice on the other end was breathless and filled with relief. "I'll get Mum and Dad too. Hang tight." Within the hour, Tia, Mr. and Mrs. Turner arrived, their faces a mixture of joy and concern. Tia was the first to rush to Ethan's side, tears brimming in her eyes as she placed a hand on his forehead. "Hey, big brother," she whispered, trying to hold back her emotions. "You had us all scared to death." Ethan managed another weak smile, his eyes flickering between Tia and Sicil. He still couldn't speak, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. His mother, Mrs. Turner, sat down on the other side of the bed, holding his other hand tightly, her knuckles white. "You're going to be fine, Ethan," Mrs. Turner whispered, her voice full of quiet determination. "The doctors say you're making progress. You just need to rest now." Mr. Turner, who had been standing back, finally stepped forward, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He gently patted Ethan's shoulder. "We're proud of you, son. Just keep fighting. We're all here for you." Sicil watched as Ethan's family surrounded him, her heart swelling with affection for them all. She smiled softly to herself, grateful that Ethan had such a strong support system. She felt like part of it now, more than ever before. The next few days were difficult. Ethan's recovery was slow, but with Sicil and his family by his side, he steadily improved. The next afternoon, Sicil was helping Ethan sip water, the two of them in comfortable silence when he finally found his voice, though raspy and weak. "Sicil!" he croaked, his voice barely audible. Cecil's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Ethan, you're talking!" she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Don't strain yourself, take it easy." He gave her a small, tired smile. "Thanks for being here." Of course, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears again. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." Later that evening, Tia and Alex popped their heads into the room, bringing some much-needed comic relief. She strolled in with a mischievous grin and a bouquet of fresh lilies she had picked up on the way. "So you just had to go and make everything dramatic, huh?" she teased, placing the flowers on the table beside his bed. "I swear, if you wanted attention, you could have just said something," added Alex. Ethan's weak chuckle filled the room, and Sicil smiled, grateful for the lightness Tia and Alex brought into the space. "Don't make me laugh, guys," Ethan muttered, a pained smile crossing his face. "It still hurts." Okay, I'll save the stand-up for later," Tia replied, raising her hands in surrender, though her grin remained. She then turned to Sicil, nudging her playfully. You're like his nurse and bodyguard rolled into one? I think Mum's going to hire you full-time. Sicil laughed, brushing off the compliment, but she couldn't deny the warm feeling it gave her. She had become a fixture in Ethan's recovery, ensuring he stayed on track with his medication, attending to his needs, and keeping his spirits up with stories and gentle encouragement. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the hospital room, Ethan's father came in, carrying a small photo album. Thought this might cheer you up, Mr. Turner said, handing the album to Sicil. It's full of Ethan's embarrassing childhood photos. Cecil's eyes lit up with delight. She opened the album and immediately burst into laughter. There was Ethan as a chubby toddler, covered in cake at his birthday party. Another of him in a ridiculous superhero costume. Wow, you were quite the little troublemaker, Sicil teased, flipping through the pages. Dad, why would you bring that? Ethan groaned, his face flushed with embarrassment. Oh, come on, you can't stay mad at me, Mr. Turner replied with a wink. It's all good fun. The whole family laughed, even Ethan, and for the first time in days, the room felt lighter. Cecil's heart swelled with happiness at seeing Ethan laugh, the boy she loved slowly returning to himself. As the weeks passed, Ethan's strength grew. He was able to speak more freely, and his physical therapy began to show real progress. But through it all, Sicil remained by his side, her presence unwavering. One afternoon, as she helped him walk down the hospital corridor during his physical therapy, Ethan stopped, looking at her with newfound admiration. You know, he said softly, I wouldn't have made it through this without you. Sicil smiled, her heart fluttering at his words. You don't give yourself enough credit, Ethan. You're the strongest person I know. He shook his head, his eyes serious. No, Sicil, it's because of you. You give me something to fight for. She blushed, her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. Well, then you better keep fighting because I'm not going anywhere. Ethan smiled, his hand squeezing hers. Deal. Their bond had deepened, and the journey to his recovery had only strengthened the love between them. As Ethan healed physically, Sicil realized just how much she needed him too, how much they needed each other.